Hi everybody and welcome to the Elephant Cast. Today we'll be talking to David Ndii. David is one of the leading economists in Kenya. He is also the technical and policy advisor to NASA, the main opposition party in Kenya. David, welcome to the Elephant.
Thank you.
There are fairly significant or different strategies that have been put forward by the national resistance movement, including the boycott of a number of companies. What is the end goal?
If you go back, we have had, I think, under what we call the second liberation, two major political milestones. The first milestone was the multi-party, to allow multi-party. But after multi-party, it was fairly obvious that you could not keep the old constitutional political sort of order. The next milestone became battle for fundamental political reforms. Mm-hmm. It took a long time, but those reforms culminated in the new constitution. It's been clear since then, certainly to the people like myself who see this reform sort of process long term, that perhaps the next big hurdle, we don't know whether there'll be another one, but the next big hurdle, and we hope it's the last one for a democratic transition, is free and fair elections. Free and fair election, if you followed our campaign, we said it was an end in itself. It was not even about whether we win or lose. We didn't want free and fair election so that we could lose in it. If we had lost in a free and fair election, we would have felt we have achieved. So for us, the electoral process is a fundamental reform battleground. It is not just about this election. I think that is the one thing that we want to ensure, because it solves all these problems you're talking about. It solves the political business cycle too. You're asking, what's the end game of this? The end game of this is actually to restructure the economy. We begin to talk very fundamentally about what kind of economy works for us.
So then these companies that have been listed to boycott, and I know there are more to come from what I'm hearing, those are targeted because...
The big picture is, as you said, we've pursued political liberation. But the reason why political liberation is so difficult is because of the economic interest that people are protecting. So we now have to get Kenyans to understand that you have to fight for economic liberation as well. So the whole conversation we've been having is about how do we also liberate the economy from this capture. So what we're dealing with is businesses which we identify as culpable in that state capture and whose interests are the interests that have aligned themselves with this state capture. We've talked about, if you look at some of these products, let's talk about soap and consumer products. These products are very easy to make. If you look at dairy, why should milk leave Trans Nzoia, get put in trucks, okay, taken all the way to Kiambu for processing, and then it's taken all the way back and sold in Bungoma? In the process incurring sort of costs, why don't the people of Trans Nzoia sell their milk to the people of Bungoma next door? They're the same people. You're talking about boycott, but what is the alternative? What alternatives do we want? We want people to do those things in their communities. So what we see is that we now bring the two together and talk about our economic interest and our political interest, because you see, in a democracy, because these people are using the economic interest and using these sort of political arguments to undermine democracy. But the voter and the consumer is the same person.
Yes, because people don't vote just because they like to go and vote. They are hoping that this will lead to some shape or form a better life for them, whatever that is.
So what we're saying is these people are making the political vote not count. But you have another vote. Yeah? It's called the consumer vote. You can use that as well. You have undermined you're undermining our democracy, so that our vote doesn't count. We queue in the sun for hours, and then you come there and bomb us, and your numbers don't add up. You're really making nonsense of the ballot. But we also have a vote called a shilling. So you can use the vote. So this is continuation of politics. You want to shut that door? We're going to use this other vote called the shilling.
Along the way, though, people will suffer. So if the economic impact of this means that some people lose their jobs, do you see this as the means justifying the end?
My parents' generation, they regale us with stories of growing up during Mahoma, and they suffered. I mean, just how they sort of sacrificed. The way that's when they were sort of young, and sort of I think my mother was like a school student, going into high school, and I sort of have, I mean, a lot of family. So this is sort of fairly sort of dinner table conversation in much of central Kenya. And they suffered, they talk about it, but I have never heard anybody regret that they sacrificed. That's why I say, no, maybe we should have lived a good life and under colonialism for those 7-8 years. Like my father-in-law spent 10 years in detention. He spent more time than Kenyatta. And I also have relatives who spent 6. I think I have a great uncle who spent 6 years. So all these people are still alive, some of them, and they have no regrets. I think the idea of trying to short-term material sort of comforts for justice and freedom, I think that's I don't know any society which considers that a sort of a fair trade-off.
This is important because we talked about the clamor or the struggle for multi-party democracy and then the struggle for new constitution. So if this is a defining moment for the country, from what you've just said, how long is this struggle going to take and at what cost?
The question you want to ask, if I can throw it back to you, is it important? I mean, if let's say, okay, you're saying at what cost? So, what is the cost of accepting sham elections? That's the question you want to ask. Do we accept sham elections? Do we go the Uganda route or the Rwanda route? Is that the way we want to go? And if you say that's not the way we want to go, then we don't have a choice. We don't ask how long it takes or what it's going to cost. I think we do it. What we are very clear is that we're going to do it using legitimate political means. Yeah, so this is people want to paint this as a military sort of thing that we are not going that route. We don't need to. There is enough civic ammunition to use. We're not starting war.
Is NASA looking at more street demonstrations?
Yes.
Should NASA avoid street protests because they cause violence, and in violent cases people suffer?
One of the fundamental principles of political freedom is the right to dissent. Okay? That is why one of the most protected, some of the most protected rights are freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Okay? Because those are really your tools of civic expression. If you cannot assemble and if you cannot speak, then that is what leads people to take up arms. Now, regimes which do not allow people dissent are called totalitarian states, like North Korea. So, one of the things you must not do is succumb to a regime which says it wants to be a dictator, and then you give up your political space. The purpose of continuing with assembly and protest and all the things allowed in the Constitution by Article 37, it is to assert that right. If you do not assert it, it will be taken away. That's what they want. 2-3 years down the road, it becomes unacceptable they could even actually amend the Constitution. We've been there before. So we fought very hard for that right. And you can see it's a contested. They want to contest it. I mean, if you think NASA is a political threat, why do they send police to disrupt Boniface Mwangi? It's not about NASA. It's about extinguishing that right. That's why if you go to any sort of mature democracy, there are all sorts of little groups protesting, demonstrating. You go to Hyde Park, you've got little people. My favorite, I lived in Rome for a while. There was not a single day without a group picketing a particular public office. That's the way democracy
So
works.
why do ours have violence?
Because there are people who, with a very totalitarian instinct, they were able to do this from independence to the early 90s. When I was in college, demonstration was illegal. We got arrested and locked up. I spent many days in Central and in Yale House. Yeah, so for people like us, we're not going to give it up.
So actually this violence, your views that it's being perpetrated by the state,
It's by the state.
not the rowdy people that come to city and break shops.
They are sponsored by the state. If you look, the Nairobi business community, who are those? The purpose is to make the demonstration unruly, and then you sort of delegitimize. So it's all a delegitimization strategy. We've been there before. We've seen these before. These are old tricks.
Well, thank you. I think that's fairly comprehensive. I appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much.